And there you go.
Okay.
So I think a lot of people here are, pretty familiar with Sarah, but just if you're not, oh, I just lost my screen. She's Sarah, correct me whenever I'm wrong. She's a master's candidate at Colorado State University, and what we're going to hear tonight is the subject of her thesis, which is ferruginous hawks and energy development in Wyoming. And I think a lot of us remember her from her days at the Teton Raptor Center in both the research and rehab departments. And it's really great to have her becoming a real professional in the business. That's really fabulous. So Sarah, over to you.
Awesome. And I'm hopeful that you're seeing the correct screen. I'm working with two right now. So I see Kate nodding, so I think we're all good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bernie, for that intro. That was all correct. So my name is Sarah Ramirez, and I am a second-year graduate student at Colorado State University. I first want to thank the Jackson Hole Wildlife or the Jackson Hole Bird and Nature Club for having me. It's really exciting to be able to talk about this work, and I'm really passionate about ferruginous hawks and this landscape. So I'm really, really excited to share it with everybody. And my thesis is looking at ferruginous hawks in energy development in Wyoming. So if I need to move this over. Oh, okay. There we go. So I wanted to start with a little bit of project background. So in 2014, Brian Bedrosian, who's at Teton Raptor Center, and Dale Woolwine out at Bureau of Land Management down in Pinedale got together in 2014 and saw this really unique opportunity to study ferruginous hawks down in the Pinedale area. So in 2014, they started pitching this project around, figuring out funding for this project, and started getting it rolling. And as Bernie mentioned, in 2015, I came along into the picture and joined the Raptor Center as an intern at the time. I was in the rehabilitation department, and I thought that this was going to be a pretty short 3-month job where I would come in and work for 3 months and put something great on my resume and move on with my life. And clearly, I have not been able to walk away from Teton Raptor Center, and it's turned into much more than I could have expected. This photo that you see here is a photo of me within the very first month that I started at the Raptor Center. Even though I was in the rehab department, I was still really interested in research. And I volunteered with the research team, and it was within the first month that I went out with Brian and Catherine out sage grouse trapping. And this type of trapping takes place, this project took place down in the Pinedale area. So it was my very first look at the Wyoming sagebrush sea. Trapping grouse takes place in the pitch black in the middle of the night. It's pretty cold temperatures. We were out there in November, but there was a decent amount of snow on the ground already. It was, I think, 10 degrees out. I was not prepared by any means for the cold or, how late the work went and the type of work that I was volunteering myself for, but absolutely fell in love with it. And it wasn't even a raptor species, it was a sage grouse. So I knew at that point that I wanted to keep working, not only with folks at Teton Raptor Center, but continue working on species similar to the grouse, but maybe in a raptor focus that need research, that takes difficult field work to answer some of these questions and whatnot like that. So that kind of leads us into 2018 when we had our first pilot year of the Ferruginous Hawk project. And in this picture, we have me, Dale Woolwine in the middle, and Brian Bedrosian on the right. And in 2020, we were able to secure additional funding to turn this project into my graduate thesis work, in which case we added Dr. Liba Bachar to the team, who's down at Colorado State, which is where I'm doing my master's. So for me, this project is a really a full circle experience of how my very first experience with Teton Raptor Center was actually out in this iconic sagebrush sea, and now has turned into the work that I do today, which also still takes place in such a phenomenal landscape. So to set the scene, our field site is located about 30 minutes south of Pinedale. This photo is of me and my dog out exploring the area. And for a lot of people, this might not look like much, but for my dog, Cedar, and I, it's our absolute favorite place to be in the world. It's one of what we consider one of the most remote places in the country. When we're out in this field site, we hardly ever run into a single person out there. I can go weeks on end camping out here and never run into another person. It can take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours driving on a dirt road to drive from a point on the highway all the way to the boundary of this field site. So it can take a while. And these roads aren't easy. We're talking dirt 2 tracks that when the rain hits can kind of change and all of a sudden no longer exist. So difficult conditions out here. And if somebody was to ask me where could they go to get a really true Wyoming experience, this is the site I would send folks to go camp out in this beautiful, vast, remote, open sagebrush sea. One of my favorite parts about the field site is when I bring a new person out here, everyone always makes a comment on the incredible diversity of species that we've seen within the very first hour. So people assume that this desert landscape is a really desolate place, when really it's teeming with a lot of mammalian and avian species. So within the first hour, we can easily see badgers and burrowing owls, as you see on the picture here, on the slide here. We've run across quite a number of horned toads and short-eared owls, golden eagles. We've got northern harriers, prairie falcons, and many more species out in this landscape. But of course, my favorite out in the landscape is the great Ferruginous hawk. So this hawk is the largest hawk species found in North America. So think bigger than a red tail, smaller than a golden eagle. They're mostly ID'd by this bright white coloring that they have throughout their breast, as well as their flight feathers. They're also known for having feathered legs. So similar to rough-legged hawks and golden eagles, they have feathered legs. These legs are actually covered in a red coloring, a rusty red coloring. And when these birds are flying, their legs form a V, a red V against their white body. So that can help you identify Ferruginous hawk out in the field. And maybe most importantly is their yellow clown beak. So they've got this, a much larger beak than most hawk species, and it's really bright yellow in color. They often can look like they're smiling at all times, and they can also often look like clowns to me. So when you're looking at photos of maybe a young bird that maybe doesn't quite have all of its plumage yet, you could almost always still identify the Ferruginous hawk because of that bright yellow beak. This hawk mostly preys on small mammals, such as prairie dogs, gopher squirrels, and various rabbit species. And it's mostly found on the western part of the United States, as well as parts of Canada and Mexico. And while there's still a lot of questions about the total population numbers for the species, it's generally accepted to be in decline across its range. So why are we talking about conserving a bird that we find in the middle of nowhere? So large-bodied raptors often have large area requirements. Wyoming is thought to hold the highest population of Ferruginous hawks in the country, and luckily has a lot of these untouched wide open spaces for these birds to occupy. And as we think about holistic conservation of the sagebrush steppe, we know how important that this area is for the migration of pronghorn and mule deer, and for the conservation of greater sage grouse. And all of these species are sharing these same critical spaces, and they face similar challenges that the Ferruginous hawk faces, such as anthropogenic development. Landscapes at this scale are increasingly rare to find. And what might seem like the middle of nowhere, these areas are actually teeming with a diversity of life. Some of these large areas are also considered at risk to be developed into energy extraction projects. So energy development poses a threat to wildlife globally. Anthropogenic activities related to wind energy, oil, and natural gas development can result in a number of detrimental effects to wildlife. This can include habitat loss or fragmentation, reductions in reproductive success, abandonment of breeding grounds, and even direct mortality. And these projects are increasing across the United States and are projected to continue doing so. Raptors are especially vulnerable to energy development due to these large area requirements and their slower life histories. And the Ferruginous hawk is no exception to this and has experienced negative effects from energy development projects.
And from nuclear power.
And as I say that, of course, my next slide is going to contradict some of this that I just mentioned. So when we do a literature review of trying to understand the relationship between Ferruginous hawks and energy development, the published work currently is kind of up in the air. Some of the work has shown positive effects, some have shown negative correlations, and others are just neutral and so show no avoidance and no attraction for Ferruginous hawks to be around energy development areas. So because of this, it's really hard to know what's going on, what's the real status of the relationship between energy development and Ferruginous hawks. The one piece that these studies note that is a caveat in this published work is that these studies have all occurred in areas where these extraction projects have already been well established. So it's possible that this research is looking at a bias sample of the Ferruginous hawk population, birds that may have already have adapted or gotten used to the disturbance in the area and what's going on development-wise. So these studies all call for a long-term work to be done that takes place before development is built to really understand what's going on before we even see landscape changes. So this brings me to our specific field site. So the Normally Pressured Lands Natural Gas Development Project, or NPL from here on out, is an approved natural gas development field in Western Wyoming that proposes 35,000 natural gas wells to be built over 150,000 acres. So if you can see on the slide here, we have a map of Wyoming. There is a red box around the area that we're talking about and blown up on the right. This field site is just 30 minutes south of Pinedale, and it's here in light blue. This map also includes the Jonah field, which is in dark blue, which is a nearby natural gas field that the NPL field kind of wraps around. So within the NPL boundary, there's currently an existing breeding population of Ferruginous hawks. And while the literature tells us that the relationship is relatively unknown, we do know that Ferruginous hawks in this area south of Pinedale, in some of these neighboring energy extraction project sites, we have seen Ferruginous hawks abandon breeding grounds, all in these bordering areas. So we're fairly certain that the population we're looking at and that we're concerned with will face these same detrimental disturbance events that could potentially lead to decreased nesting productivity or abandonment. And sort of like what I mentioned in the last slide is that what past research hasn't had an opportunity to do yet is research Ferruginous hawks before the development comes in so that we can compare and better explain the relationship seen afterwards. And this approved site gives us a really unique opportunity to understand these hawks in a more natural setting, understand what aspects are key to their nest success and breeding survival, and work towards informing proper mitigation measures to ensure that this population remains in the area. So, like I mentioned before, this is a collaborative project with Teton Raptor Center, Bureau of Land Management in Pinedale, and Colorado State University. And what we've all collaboratively come together for my thesis work is this outline. So to get a really good sense of where what is the status of our ferruginous hawks on the landscape right now. So chapter 1 is going to look at nest site selection and nest success. So essentially looking at where are these birds choosing to set up their nests. And then we take that one step further with nest success and figure out now that we know where they've set up these nests, which nests have been successful, which nests are failing, and can we figure out a reason why? Is there something that makes certain nests more successful than others? In chapter 2, we'll be looking at home range size. So how much space in this landscape, how much space are these birds using and claiming as territory? And how does this home range size change given different factors that these birds are working with on the landscape? And lastly, once we've figured out home range size, we'll start to look at habitat selection. So how are these birds using the habitat throughout this landscape? Are they preferring to hunt in areas that have really thick sagebrush, or are they picking areas that are mostly flat or open or considered barren? Are these birds avoiding existing development, avoiding highways, or are they preferring to hunt around those areas? All things that we're really looking forward to learning as we move forward. Today, I just want to focus on home range size. So we've gotten through the background of this project. Now, how do we even begin to answer any of these questions? So far we've had 4 field seasons starting in 2018. To answer these questions, we first need to survey the field site for active nests. This field site has supported up to 20 active nests in one single field season, with many additional non-breeding pairs and nomads that occupy the area. And this population generally arrives to these breeding grounds in mid to late March, and they spend the month building their nests before laying eggs in late April. So a little bit earlier than maybe some of our other raptor species that we're paying attention to. We generally start surveying for nests in May, and our first 3 field seasons, we did all of this by car. And before I get into more surveying, I want to point out the different types of nest substrates that our birds can choose to nest on. So this picture on the left is a nest that we had this last year that was built on top of an erosional pillar. These types of nests in this area are generally have very steep terrain leading up to their nests. It's hard, if not nearly impossible, to actually climb up into these nests to look at any leftover casts or anything in the nest after the season's over. And they're generally really high up based off of the base landscape. We also have birds choosing to nest on ground hillsides. So in this example, in the middle, this is generally in areas that are more rolling hills, and we'll have birds that will choose to place a nest right on the ground, usually not quite at the top of a hill, but pretty close to the top, and they'll set their nest right on the ground. So as you can imagine, these nests are considered really susceptible to mammalian predators, badgers, foxes, the like that. In 3 seasons of all of these hillside nests that we found, we haven't actually had one be successful yet. So really, really tough to be successful as a hillside nest. And lastly, we have sort of a combination of the erosional pillars and the hillside with these rocky butte outcroppings. So again, this nest isn't quite at the top of the hill, but it's near the top. These nests are generally challenging to hike/crawl into, but they're doable. So steep, but not terribly steep, not as steep as compared to the erosional pillars. And if you can notice from these photos, most of these, we do have nests that tend to be different nest heights too, which you may be able to see. I'm not sure, depending on how big or small your screen is. The nest on the far right is quite a bit bigger than either of the nests on the 2 left side. Ferruginous hawks do come back to they show pretty high nest fidelity, which means that they come back year after year to at least the same territory, and most likely to the same exact nest to continue mating and breeding again. So nests that are used year after year are generally pretty well built up. So this photo on the far right has been actually built up and has been built upon all 4 seasons that we've been out on the field site, while the nest on the far left is pretty small. It usually at the beginning of the season starts a little higher than this, but chicks will start to kick out sticks and twigs and whatnot and make it quite a bit lower. That nest was freshly built this past year. So I mentioned that to do these nest surveys, we survey by car. So this involves our team checking for active nests by driving around. So we've investigated historical nest sites that BLM had previously identified, which included over 200 individual nests. So in our very first pilot year, BLM sent us over 200 nests to go check out that either looked like Ferruginous hawks or could have been Ferruginous or golden eagles, since they can look pretty similar. So in the first pilot year, we went and checked out every single one of those nests and recategorized them as whether they were being actively used, whether they looked pretty broken down, or whether they were non-existent at all. We also surveyed every hillside for a nest, and we even got down to just following individual birds to their territory. So anytime that we saw a bird, we would stop. Usually this was a good snack break, and we would sit and watch these birds and see if their behavior was indicating to us that maybe they were defending a territory, or maybe we saw them building a nest or picking up sticks from the ground, trying to build a nest in the area. So watching behavior was really, really vital to this work as well. And to give you a sense of the expansiveness of this field and the work that it takes to complete all of this, in 2019 alone, my team put 10,000 miles on a single work vehicle. And this does not include any miles that we put on the TRC work rigs when the TRC crew was able to come down and join us and help in the field. And it also does not include any miles that we put on personal vehicles while out there. So this is for one single Colorado State University vehicle. And it takes a massive amount of work to find, and it was a huge effort we put forward to find every single nesting pair of Ferruginous hawks. And I'm happy to say we did not do this in vain. That same year, we identified around 20 occupied territories, which is way more than we ever expected. When we originally started the project, we had a sense for maybe 6 that we would find, maybe 6 total nests in the area. We were super hopeful that we would find more, but we didn't quite think that 20 was going to be this upper end number of what we would see out here. So very happy to say it was not in vain to do all that work, but still it took a lot of time. So in this last field season in 2020, we were able to have additional funding that could pay for a flight survey. So in this photo, you'll see Chris Bonter, who is a pilot from Flightline, and we've got our very own Brian Bedrosian, and these two went up and did our flight surveys in the field. So in a similar but much easier fashion than surveying from the car, this involves flying around on transects, looking down at the ground and trying to find every active nest that you possibly could. And I do have a video of what this experience would look like that I will play if it wants to. So this is really giving you a bird's eye view of this landscape. And it's showing the vastness, showing the sagebrush, showing some of the barren areas here. There actually is a nest coming up in this video that is really, really difficult to see. So if I can take my mouse, if you can see my mouse, this is a nest on a platform that is in this field site. And And if you missed it the first time it came around, I don't blame you. I also missed it. It's very difficult to see, but it gives us a sense of, how difficult this search image is out on this landscape. It is pretty important to note that these surveying from a plane is an accepted standard of practice for surveying for many wildlife species. And after this work was done, we saw no abandonment of nests after these surveys. And while these surveys came with a higher price compared to doing the car surveys, this consolidated our nest surveying efforts to just 2 days. So a huge shout out and thanks to Chris and Brian for completing these surveys. It definitely allowed our team to focus less on nest surveying and be able to move forward with other aspects of the project. So we've gone out, we have found every active nest. What's next? So the next step was to identify and target breeding adults for GPS units. So we captured breeding adults and we equipped them with GPS units with a backpack style harness. This is a type of harness that fits just like a backpack over each arm, over each shoulder. And then for these birds, they have a little piece in the middle that kind of helps everything stay in place, help that backpack stay at the center of their back. As you can see from this picture, these units have a solar panel that helps recharge the battery and keep the unit working. And in this specific unit, you can see this very long antenna. This data gets directly uploaded to a satellite, which we can later jump right onto our computer and see where our bird is at the current location. So it's like Christmas morning every time you're logging in and seeing, ooh, where's the bird today? So really thankful that we had these units to be able to use. These units gathered location data either every 30 minutes or every hour, depending on the unit we used. And between 2019 and 2021, we deployed 12 different units on 12 adults. And I'm sure this question will come up. How does putting these backpacks affect these birds? So GPS units are well used in wildlife species, including raptors. This specific photo is a photo of one of our females that we banded in 2019. She has, since that year, she has nested every single year since. She's completed both of her fall and spring migrations multiple times, and she's returned each summer for breeding. And you might wonder, how are we getting such cool photos of our Ferruginous hawks? We have been able to sneak our trail cameras into a lot of these nests. This was done in November time, well before, well after these birds had already left the field site. And we went out and we snuck these cameras in so that by the time they came back around and nested, it would already be there. We wouldn't have to do extra disturbance. And we've learned a lot from these trail cameras. So one piece that we have learned is been able to watch these birds do everyday activities with these backpacks on. So we've been able to confirm that these backpacks don't interfere with their day-to-day activity. Now, we've put out these GPS backpacks to talk about home range size and breeding grounds. But I want to share this really super exciting piece of this work, which is migration. So, we put out these backpacks so that we can understand these birds on the home range. But of course, these backpacks are still collecting data well after these birds leave, during their fall migration, during the winter, and then when they come back in the spring as well. So we've got a lot of really cool extra data that is really fun to look at. When we think about migrating species, we often think about golden eagles that, come from Alaska and Canada, and they converge onto the Rocky Mountain Highway. Or we think about shorebirds that, flock up with multiple other species and migrate along shorelines. Or we think about cranes that migrate back and forth under specific flyways. This does not seem to be the case for Ferruginous hawks. So this map, I don't want it to get too confusing, but every color on this map is an individual tagged bird and their migration path. So the biggest pieces to kind of look at are most of these southern pieces where I'm circling with the mouse. We've had birds, wintering in New Mexico, Texas, the Oklahoma Panhandle here. We've had two birds that have been wintering in northern Colorado, so Fort Collins and Boulder area. We have another bird that is wintering in this Four Corners region, so just can't quite decide what state to be in, so chose to be in 4 and 1. And even funnier is we've had two birds decide that they wanted to winter just outside Las Vegas, Nevada. So these birds are picking different wintering grounds amongst themselves. They all have different pathways that they're choosing to take. And just recently, we did have a bird that most of our birds are still moving south at this point, and we did have a bird enter Mexico recently. So this is definitely the farthest south we've ever had a tag bird go. So pretty exciting. And it's really important when we think about conservation of ferruginous hawks, it's really important to understand that when we work with them during the breeding season, this is just a really small snapshot of where they're spending their time in an entire year. They only really spend 3 to 4 months on these breeding grounds. We only really work with them for 3 to 4 months, and then they pick up and they go somewhere else for the fall. They go somewhere else for the winter. They go somewhere else for the spring. And they're all, usually these places are outside Wyoming. So it's really important that when we talk about conservation of ferruginous hawks, where these birds spend their time, the large the majority of the year is going to affect these birds when they come back for breeding. So we have to keep that in mind when we consider breeding success and other parameters that we're looking at. We also need to know that collaboration is vital to conserving this population, to conserving all ferruginous hawks, that they don't just need Wyoming or Sublette County to be on board with protecting these birds and working with these birds, but we need multiple states to be on the same page about this stuff. So collaboration is my main message with that. So back to home range. So this is a very basic map where, again, we're looking at a space that is about 30 minutes south of Pinedale. And the town of Big Piney is at this 351, 189 junction right here. So Big Piney. On the other side, we have 191 as if you're heading down to Rock Springs. And this is an example map of all of the location data that we've gathered to date. So every single one of these points is a location data point for our birds. Pretty much everything within this kind of highway buffer is the NPL zone. So we've got data points kind of all across this, this area. And as we take this location data, we can start to analyze our home range size. So first, I want to talk about home range size between males and females. So to talk through this map on the right side of our slide, each color represents a different bird. If you can imagine, these boundaries went around these location points. And typically what we do is you have all of your location data points, and you pick a boundary that is slightly less than including 100% of the data points. So you'll see this 98% number at the top. So this is essentially saying that 2% of these location data points are probably outliers. Maybe the bird is exploring a new spot or is chasing a bird away and might just happen to be in an area that's not typically where they spend their time. So we want to make sure we exclude those outliers. So that's what this percentage is referencing. And so each one of these blobs on this map represents a home range size for an individual bird. And when we look at, let's see if I can see my other screen better. So things to pay attention to is this green part that I'm moving my mouse around, as well as this kind of dark shaded orange home range size. So those represent 2 females that we tagged in 2019. And then the other three polygons, so this purple one, this blue one, and then this large yellow one, those represent the males from the 2019 season. So what we've noticed is that our females have a pretty significantly smaller home range size compared to our males. So again, this green and this orange are smaller compared to how encompassing this male's yellow outline is showing us. Blue is larger and our purple is larger. And we wanted to make sure that we tagged both females and males because they do utilize the habitat differently. So we're not terribly surprised by these results. We kind of expected the females to be smaller than the males, just based on how they utilize the habitat differently. So if they're using habitat differently, we want to be able to understand what each need to be successful in breeding. And so, what are these different responsibilities during the breeding season? So females are our main egg incubators. So they're in charge of laying the eggs and generally do the most amount of incubating compared between males and females. Females generally are hunting within view of the nest. They usually are always typically given the very first alarm calls to predators in the area, while our males are doing the large majority of hunting. And if you've ever volunteered in the rehab clinic during juvenile season or nesting season, you know how much more young birds need to eat compared to our adult birds. So the male is in charge of making sure he's fed, his mate's fed, and his chicks are fed. He can, if he's lucky in this field site, he'll have upwards of 4 young to raise and as little as 1. Even if you only have 1, that's still a lot of hunting that you need to do. So he's using a lot more space. He's hunting a lot more and just utilizing the habitat more. So it makes sense that we would see these different sizes and home ranges for males and females. And it's important moving forward that we understand how are they utilizing the habitat differently. As we move forward today, I just want to concentrate on data of our males, specifically because previous literature has published on male home range sizes. So that's really what we have when we're looking at how does our population compare to others. So our males are close to an average home range size of 26 kilometers squared. When we look at the literature of what's previously been reported, there's averages that are as low as 3.1 kilometers squared and averages as high as 90.3 kilometers squared. So that's quite a large range of what home range size could be on average for different populations. And our males look like they're kind of on the lower end of that large spectrum. And there could be a lot of reasons for why there's this large range for home range sizes reported. And firstly, if I haven't already mentioned it, Ferruginous hawks are considered an understudied species. So when you do a literature review, looking at Ferruginous hawks and home range sizes, you will find 6 published papers currently, and 5 of which have occurred before 1998. So as you can imagine, our technology since 1998 has really advanced, and we're able to start using much more sensitive equipment that can explain movement data. And so I mentioned that 5 of those papers were before 1998. One paper was a master's student's thesis work that came out in early 2021, so incredibly recent. He looked at home range size using similar methods to us. And so for now, we'll compare our data to what's seen in a population in Alberta, Canada. So this is a quick comparison chart I want to go through, comparing the Alberta population and Jesse Watson's work on Ferruginous hawks and home range compared to our population in the NPL zone. And I do want to point out this caveat with my mouse here. So the Alberta population's average home range size was averaged about 50 kilometers squared, while our birds are about half that at 25, 26 kilometers squared. This N number reflects how many home range sizes went into calculating this average. And clearly, Watson's work used a lot more individuals, 63 individual home range sizes, to calculate his average compared to our 9 at this point for 9 male home range sizes. So definitely a huge caveat in comparing these is that he has a lot more data to work with, while ours is just still a small subsample. When we look at land cover between these populations, the Alberta population is really majority in native grassland areas and croplands, while our birds are really in a very dominated sagebrush steppe. The Alberta population has a lot of primary and secondary highways that are fragmenting through his study site, while our site, it has a few highways that border the edges, but it's really a very remote area, and it's mostly consisting of gravel and dirt 2-tracks that are not well used. Again, I can spend weeks out there and never run into a single person, so much different type of roads out there. The Alberta population mostly is found nesting on trees, platforms, infrastructure, windmills, and the occasional ground hillside. While our population is mostly nesting, and if you remember some of those photos from earlier, on erosional pillars, rocky buttes, the occasional ground hillside, and platforms. So if we're looking between the Alberta population and the Wyoming population for just our NPL area, the Alberta population definitely has a lot more anthropogenic challenges and has a lot more people and development that the population is living amongst compared to our very remote population. So these are just a few differences between these populations that could explain why home range size is so different between our populations. And when we compare home range size, both between Alberta and our population, as well as within our very own population, we do see a wide range of sizes. Our own population, while the average is 26 kilometers squared, was as low as 14 kilometers squared and as high as 60 kilometers squared. So we still have quite a range within our own population. And we start to consider why might this be? The current thoughts on home range size is that larger home range size can indicate poor quality habitat, low prey abundance, or widely distributed critical habitat. So when we think about larger home ranges, we think about an increased exposure to risk and an increased energy needs. So a bird that maybe doesn't quite have enough prey to sustain both him, his mate, and chicks might have to go farther, fly farther to go hunting and get the necessary, use more of the habitat to be able to sustain his nest and the young that he's trying to fledge. And if you think about a bird having to go maybe twice as far as another bird to go hunting, they not only risk flying through somebody else's territory or risk exposing themselves to maybe more cars, more electrical poles, any kind of risk that you can think of, maybe more mammal predators. If they do that hunting and then have to fly all the way back, carry that food all the way back to their young, it puts them at a significant disadvantage compared to birds that can utilize a smaller home range size that can have everything that they need a lot closer than other birds. So these are just some of the things that we start to look at when we consider our own home range size. So as we wrap up today, I want to make sure that we've covered the big takeaways that I want you to take away from this talk today. That first, ferruginous hawks are understudied. We are just barely scratching the surface on what we know about them, especially when it comes to considering their relationship with energy development. The Ferruginous hawk is an incredible symbol of Wyoming's vast open spaces, and really needs to be thought about in that manner and conserved with that in mind. And finding mitigation measures is vital. So we know of the papers that show negative disturbance events and what we've anecdotally seen in neighboring natural gas development fields, we know that mitigation is vital to making sure that the populations that do suffer from development, they need support. There needs to be something that comes in and works for them to help continue their breeding success, continue keeping them on their breeding grounds, and making sure that this population continues well into the future. So we talked about one small piece of my work, which is home range size. It's not even the full look at home range size yet. Moving forward, the next step of this work is to look at what factors contribute to this variation in home range size. We have a guess that it's likely something to do with habitat quality, but we need to look into what specific pieces of the habitat are contributing to changes in home range size. We also are going to look at nest site selection and success. We're going to investigate habitat selection and eventually inform mitigation measures to implement pre-development. There is an incredible group of collaborators that make this work possible. I have a lot of gratitude to Brian Bedrosian and Dale Woolwine for not only getting this project started, but believing and bringing me on board in the first place. Everybody on this slide deserves a very personal thank you from me. Definitely could not have gotten this work done without anybody listed here. And with that, I would love to take any questions you might have, any clarifications of anything that I covered. My email is here, and I'm happy to put it in the chat too, should you need to leave or we run out of time to answer more questions, but please feel free to email me about anything about this stuff.
Thank you, Sarah. So if you have the technological know-how, please put your questions in the chat or raise your hand. And I've got one already. Got a couple. Sarah, do you think, Tim says, do you think you have identified all of the birds in the survey area that utilize it?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to stop sharing my screen. I'm not sure how to do that without leaving.
Hang on, don't you let me try and worry about that.
Tim, it's a great question. I'm really glad you asked it. I am very confident that we have found every single nesting Ferruginous hawk out on this landscape. It's, when we started, we were doing it by car and we were working really hard, and we just kind of had you have this sense and you hope that you're doing your due diligence and you're finding every bird. And then for last year, for Brian to go up in the plane and find, he found every single nest that we had found in the past, and everything new that he found was new builds from the 2020 season. So it was really, it was good for my own confidence of being like, okay, the flight surveys, they definitely won't miss a single bird. So yeah, I feel good that we have always found every bird out there.
Kate Gersh asks, are the platforms intentional for nesting, like what we have here for the osprey, or are the platforms there for another reason? It is just advantageous use by the Ferruginous? Yeah,
so platforms, when we're considering mitigation measures, platforms is where mitigation is heading for Ferruginous hawks. Right now, the science is saying that one of their biggest limitations is just nest site options. And when we talked about birds that nest on the hillside, that those landscapes might have literally everything else that they could need, but are more vulnerable because they're on the ground. And maybe putting up platforms could get them off the ground, protect them from mammal predators, and give them a better chance. So BLM, before we came out onto the project, BLM put out a few platforms to see, are birds even going to take to these? And they have. There's a few that food platforms that haven't been nested on, but there are definitely a few that the birds have taken to.
Just as a side note on that, Sarah, I'm up in Montana now at the moment, and I was talking with Montana Audubon people today, and they were saying that ferruginous hawks in western Montana are preferential on lopped trees,
Ah,
especially those that are less than 12 feet off the ground. And
yes.
and I've seen them up there. They nest in these weird places, but they like to be on these lower platforms about 6 to 10 feet up.
Mm.
They can do it.
Yeah, these platforms are pretty low.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're about, I think, 10 feet tall. They're really quite short. And it's interesting when we look at ferruginous hawks throughout the United States, the ones that breed in Utah, and it sounds like Montana too, they're nesting in mostly trees. Whereas our birds, there's a couple opportunities to nest in trees, but really not. It's really, they really don't have that option. So our birds just don't.
Catherine Gura asks, thanks, Sarah. It sounds like it's pretty unique to be able to look at these habitat characteristics prior to energy development. Are there any plans in place to study these birds after energy development occurs?
Yeah, there's definitely a very, we're setting the stage up well for that. So we're getting all this pre-development data done. A project looking at post-energy development is highly important. I really doubt that Brian or Dale would let this project fall to the wayside without making sure that that type of work continues, because it could be really profound to compare and contrast, especially for a species like the Ferruginous hawk. So it's setting up the stage really well for that type of project to occur.
And Francis Clark asks, are the BLM parcels already leased? Today, BLM decided not to lease many parcels in core sage-grouse habitat.
I just called Dale at BLM to confirm this before coming into this talk, that the entire area is approved, but there's not yet any leased parcels to develop wells. There was, right before COVID, they had many plans to start, but the way that the economy kind of changed, they really are now kind of waiting for essentially funds to be able to actually continue and put their wells out. So it did buy us a little bit of time. So one benefit of COVID was buying us a little bit more field time before development comes in.
And I don't see any other questions, but I would like to, I'd just like to thank you, Sarah. This is great. This is a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And Brian, Kate has her hand up. Sorry, Kate. No, okay. Brian says that the NPL is outside of grouse core, so it wouldn't necessarily be affected on a core habitat decision.
Mm-hmm.
I want to point out just how many people are on this Zoom that are either have been presenters for the Bird Club or will be presenters for the Bird Club, like Hillary Turner and Jeff Burrell. And we've still got slots to fill, but the interaction between the conservation groups here on bird protection and bird research is really very rewarding and a little bit unusual. It's not just the Raptor Center, and it's not just the Jackson Hole Wildlife Foundation. It's not just the grants given by the Megan Burt Rains Wildlife Fund, which Sarah was a recipient of. It's the fact that all these groups work together, and they work very much hand in hand with external partners. Like I know Brian and Rob Dominich at Raptor View up in Montana are joined at the hip. And there's just an incredible amount of cooperation that goes on between particularly raptor organizations, but all bird organizations in this area of the Mountain States, over in Boise with the lab that Jay Carlisle runs, and we hope to get him to come talk to us about AJ and his other curlews. But it's incredibly rewarding, and it just breeds more data and more effective research that helps influence these decisions that are made 30,000 feet above our head most of the time. Frances has got her hand up, and I'm sure it's not because she's waving me goodbye.
No, it seems to be an appropriate time to say that the Meg and Bert Rains Wildlife Fund that has supported many of these projects, as Bernie has just noted, is going to be looking for new grant proposals starting now. I think their deadline is February 1. So any researchers or people who know researchers, spread the word. They can go to our website, just Google Rains Wildlife Fund, and you can find that information. We're going to be updating our website soon, we hope. But the main thing is we want to spread the word that we're looking for grants. They're not huge sizes, the $3,000 to $5,000, $6,000 each. We give out about 6 or 7 a year. We did very well at Old Bills this year, so we may be able to give out 1 or 2 more, or a little bit more to each. So spread the word, please, so we can get more of these great work done and more information out to everybody.
And with that, let's see. Oh, Tim wants to know, where can Margie go to see this recorded presentation? I don't think it's going to be on the IMAX screen over in Idaho Falls, Tim, but it has to be uploaded to the cloud, and then the library has to tell me how to get access to it. So it's going to be a few days. And Kate says, awesome work, Sarah. And I agree. Thank you so much, Sarah. And
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed being able to share this work.
Tell your fiance I expect a loon presentation.
I think that's necessary.
I do too.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
You just
Have
put
a
him in
great
any
evening.
slot, he'll take it.
You can come do it live.
Oh yeah, even better. That would
Yeah.
be great.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.
you.
Next month, it's going to be winter bird identification and Christmas bird count with Susan Marsh. So don't miss it.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.